For generations, NATO ran on one simple assumption. When the alliance needed muscle, money, or leadership, the United States carried most of the weight, and everyone else followed. Today, standing in front of reporters at a NATO summit in Turkey, Mark Carney said, in plain terms, that Canada isn't planning to follow anymore. It's preparing to help lead. Carney opened by laying out why this shift is happening now. He pointed to a threat landscape moving faster than most Western governments planned for: hypersonic missiles, autonomous drone warfare, hybrid attacks that blur the line between war and peace, and Russia now treated as a direct adversary rather than a distant worry. For years, he said, everyone in NATO understood that the burden of paying for collective defense was slowly shifting away from the United States and toward Europe and Canada. That shift isn't theoretical anymore. It's happening in real time, and Canada has just backed it up with a wave of new procurement announcements. A new submarine fleet, light military vehicles, munitions, and a new surveillance aircraft program that NATO itself has now formally endorsed. Strip away the summit language, and here's what he's actually saying. The world got more dangerous faster than most Western governments planned for, and the old arrangement, where Washington quietly covered the gap, isn't reliable anymore. Somebody has to fill that gap. Carney's answer is that Canada intends to be one of the countries that does. The next thing reporters wanted answered was the one every taxpayer actually cares about. How much is this going to cost, and how fast? Carney confirmed NATO's members are committed to hitting 5% of GDP in defense-related spending by 2035, with that target set to be reviewed again in 2030 as the threat picture keeps evolving. For Canada specifically, he laid out the actual trajectory. When he took office, Canada was spending just 1.4% of GDP on direct defense, among the lowest in the alliance. That's already climbed to 2%, the highest level since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and it's set to rise again to 2.5% within 4 years. Add in a further 1.5% of GDP earmarked for broader resilience spending, and by NATO's own accounting method, Canada will be at 4% before the end of the decade, closing in fast on that 5% target. And he made a point of saying where the money went first, not new jets or ships, but properly paying the women and men serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. Let's put that in perspective, because the raw percentages can slide past you if you're not paying attention. Going from 1.4% to 4% of GDP isn't a modest budget adjustment. It's close to tripling Canada's defense and resilience spending inside a single mandate, after decades where Canada was routinely singled out at NATO meetings as one of the alliance's laggards on spending. That reputation took years to earn, and Carney is clearly trying to spend his way out of it fast. And notice where he says the money went first. Not fighter jets, not submarines, but pay for serving Canadian Forces members. That's a deliberate signal aimed at a domestic audience as much as a NATO one. Before Canada buys new hardware, it's fixing the fact that it's struggled for years to recruit and retain the people needed to use the hardware it already has. But the most interesting part of this press conference wasn't about spending more. It was about spending smarter, and Carney used Ukraine as his example. He described how, since 2014, Ukraine has become one of the world's fastest-moving centers for drone and autonomous weapons development out of sheer battlefield necessity. Rather than treating that as someone else's war, Carney framed it as a resource the whole alliance can draw on. Canada, he said, is actively partnering Canadian defense firms with Ukrainian ones, building supply chains that stretch across borders. A company in Ukraine, a company in Canada, maybe a partner in the Nordics too, and financing that entire chain together rather than each country trying to build the same capability alone from scratch. His argument was that this approach lowers costs for everyone involved, avoids wasteful duplication across the alliance, and strengthens the overall partnership at the same time. This is the part that's easy to miss if you're only listening for spending numbers. Carney is describing something closer to an industrial alliance than a military one. Canadian companies and Ukrainian companies building the same drone and autonomous weapon systems together, splitting the cost of production across borders, instead of every country reinventing the same technology alone. It's a quiet admission that Ukraine, a country under active invasion, has become one of the world's fastest-moving defense innovation labs, and that Canada would rather partner with that expertise than compete against it or ignore it It's also, bluntly, a way to get more defense capability per dollar, which matters a lot when you've just told your own taxpayers their spending is about to triple. Later in the same press conference, Carney made perhaps his boldest claim of the day. He argued that NATO has treated North American security, and Arctic security specifically, as an afterthought for too long, something Canada was quietly left to handle on its own. With 15% of the world's coastline sitting inside Canada's borders, he insisted the Arctic isn't a side flank of NATO's strategy anymore. It's becoming one of the alliance's actual front lines, as ice retreats and global interest in the region grows. He called for tighter coordination between Canada and its northern-facing allies, the Nordic countries, Germany, France, and the Baltic states. Treating that whole northern arc as a single strategic zone the alliance needs to take seriously rather than Canada's problem alone. Put all three pieces together, the spending ramp-up, the Ukraine-style industrial partnerships, and the Arctic argument, and you get a much bigger claim than Canada is spending more on defense. Carney is arguing Canada should be treated as one of NATO's more important strategic players over the next decade, not one of its quieter members writing checks in the background. Whether NATO's other members actually buy into that vision, or Canada ends up back on the list of countries falling short of its targets, is something only the next few years will answer. But after this press conference, nobody at NATO can say Canada didn't make its case loudly and clearly. Do you think Canada is actually ready to take on a bigger leadership role inside NATO? Or is this more ambition than capability right now? Subscribe to Unbiased Canada, hit like, and let us know in the comments.